What about all the influence coming into this country? All the farmland that they're buying, all of the residential that they're buying. I mean, from what I know, I mean, look at California. There is a massive migration coming out of California into red states. Tennessee being one of them, Texas, Florida. You're seeing this massive migration of Californians moving out of the state. Now, the funny thing is, with the amount of Californians leaving that state, you would think their real estate prices would plummet. But they're not, because the Chinese in BlackRock are buying up all of the residential. And on top of that, they're buying, are they, I don't know this to be fact, but maybe you do. Do they own more farmland in the US than any one person or business entity?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So what's my understanding of what's happening when it comes to property ownership in the United States, specifically property rights that are in our country but belong to foreign nationals from China. This is a situation where they understand our legal system better than we do. We built our real estate structure in the 1950s on the idea that there was only one superpower, only one country wealthy enough to be able to own property in the United States, and that was us. And then as the 1970s came and oil was discovered in the Middle East and oil was discovered in Latin America, and a few drug kingpins became, uber wealthy, people, other foreign nationals started realizing that they could take advantage of the same US tax code to shelter their money. So property has always been something that the wealthy have been able to use to tax protect their assets. But now, instead of only Americans being able to buy American property, our law made it so that foreign nationals could also buy our property. And it makes sense, because for a foreign national to buy an American property, they're bringing outside money into the US economy. We want that. And then the United States always has the right to basically take eminent domain or some other policy or government structure to pull back the property and make it ours and take ownership away from a foreign national. So we've always had that kind of clause where we could just take it back if we wanted to and keep their money. We don't want to do that because then people are going to stop investing. But as long as people are investing, if they have the money, let them bring their money into our economy. That was all well and good when the United States was the most significant superpower in the world. Well, then enter 2000s, and now you've got China and their growing middle class, their center of manufacturing. They're not pouring money into the military-industrial complex to fight the global war on terror like we were. Instead, they can just develop new technology, the birth of Huawei, the birth of cellular technology advancements in China, and the multitude of technologies that they're stealing from Europe and Latin America and making a fortune off of, right? Not to mention all of their shipping money and everything else. Now, you've got all these wealthy Chinese people. They are not going to buy property in China because they already know they won't own it. The Chinese party will own it. They could lose it at any time. So the safer option for their investment is to actually buy property in the United States, where there's some sort of legal protection of the investment, and the United States is naturally incentivized not to take that property back from them, because to do that would be to essentially forfeit all foreign investors in investing in property in the United States. We didn't anticipate that happening, and we couldn't change policy fast enough to stop it from happening, because what was happening from 2000 to 2020, the biggest economic boon for the United States that we had seen in like 50 years. Mm-hmm. Like it was, there's the kind of the running saying is that it was impossible not to make money in the United States between like 2005 and 2019. That so significant was our economic boon cycle that you could throw money at a wall and you would get a return on investment. So we got caught. We got caught with our pants down. Somebody used our policy against us. And now huge tracts of farmland and industrial properties. I mean, it's not just industrial properties, man. There are mineral mines on U.S. soil that are majoritively owned and controlled by Chinese companies. Think about
It
that.
doesn't surprise me. I read somewhere that the Chinese own the power plant that powers the biggest military base in Texas.
Through a shell company of a shell company of a shell company. Again, we taught them how to do that. That's American business practice. In the United States, you can open a business and your business is seen in the eyes of the law as a person. It has rights and protections like a person. We created that. They just take advantage of it.
Don't. I also read that one of the only loans that Chinese can apply for is real estate loans to buy property here in the U.S. So while you say it's individuals, China's obviously influencing its population to invest their money here in the United States. And then we go to Chinese law, which I'm not familiar with. But if they can just pull a business like that, couldn't they just pull somebody's property that was owned in a foreign country just like that?
It's harder to cross international lines like that. That's true. But the other thing is, we're not talking about normal Chinese, right? The average annual income in the United States is like $45,000 a year. The average annual income inside China is like $21,000 a year. So there are, by American standards especially, there are just tons of poverty-stricken Chinese. So in order to be a Chinese person that could actually afford to qualify for a real estate loan by American standards in the United States, you'd have to be a very wealthy Chinese person to even be able to do that. So it's not like they're incentivizing or encouraging their general population to buy property here. Instead, it's a wealthy subcomponent or a wealthy subsector of Chinese business people and elites that want to make a wise investment of their capital, their excess capital, so they put it into a U.S. property. And they put it into a U.S. bank and they put it into a U.S. loan, which generates interest for Americans and boosts the American economy, right? We have to come to terms as a country with accepting that we are an economy first capitalist country. And that's a good thing. I like that we're a capitalist country. I like that we put money first. I like that we drive economy as a core value. I like that. That's what we should do. But we should also have like a bubble of protection around that, where we can limit it to just American citizens. We can limit it to just individuals vetted by certain government departments as viable candidates to take a loan from a U.S. bank. We don't have to have the freaking doors wide open to God and everybody and have, drug kingpins and human smugglers and oligarchs from Russia. We don't need to just let everybody buy our property. We can insulate ourselves. We just never took the steps to do it before, partly because we don't grow very fast. You were military, I'm military. There's a certain element in military where we call ourselves too dumb to quit. I'm sure you've heard that before. Mm-hmm. The United States is so punch drunk on wealth, we're kind of too dumb to quit. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit of reflection, a little bit of work for us to go back, review, and change our policies. And absolutely, we'd have to shake hands across the aisles in the Senate and the House to be able to agree to make some changes. China's gambling on the fact that we're too dumb to ever change our policies. We'll be too busy arguing with each other over the next president and who controls the next house.
Well, do you think they're influencing the division?
Oh, for sure. But it's not just them. Think about every election in the world that we try to influence. Every one of those countries is going to try to influence our election too. I never understood why people got so upset in 2016 when there was evidence of Russian tampering in the presidential election. What the hell do people think happens in every election? Mm-hmm. There's tampering in every single election. All we saw in 2016 was that FBI got smart enough to catch the Russians doing it. That doesn't mean it didn't happen in 2012. Doesn't mean it didn't happen in 2020. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen in 2024. It happens every cycle. And it happens every midterm. And it happens at local levels too. The Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, the Iranians, they are all very, very heavily invested in shaping American politics. Not shaping American politics for a specific winner, but shaping American politics so it causes chaos. It's a core fundamental belief, it's a concept, a core concept in covert influence. That influence doesn't always mean that you're influencing a specific outcome. It just means that you're influencing the process. Causing chaos and division and infighting is 100% a planned outcome of covert influence. We're seeing it every day. We just don't call it that. We refuse to accept the idea that maybe our vote isn't only being influenced by American decision making or even our own judgment. Maybe some of those TV ads that we're seeing, maybe some of those Facebook ads that we're seeing, maybe some of the articles that are being sponsored and put in front of us are not paid for by Americans.
Yeah.
So I start off with the laser gun this time, as it is the most effective weapon in the early stages. It can wipe out all enemies without missing a
This episode of the Shawn Ryan Show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I'm and us with BetterHelp benefits. I found this company anxiety, jitters. I genuinely Sean Mudd for influencing all this. Sean Mudd for 15% off. You want to go into a little more detail on how they're influencing all this?
Absolutely. So covert influence, what many people call propaganda. Propaganda, and I think we were mentioning this earlier too, propaganda is kind of an unsophisticated term that's used in countries where information is controlled. So the Russians used propaganda. The Nazis used propaganda. The Chinese still have an office of propaganda. Propaganda is essentially when you block true information and you flood controlled false information, intentionally false information, what's known as disinformation.
Do you think we do that?
I think
in our own country to our own people?
It's different for us. We don't have the ability to make propaganda because we can't control the flow of accurate information. What we do have the ability to do is use the tenets of covert influence and misinformation, which is errant or wrong information. We do allow those things to take root. So, for example, let's just look at the spy balloon. That was another thing on your list. What was it, 4 weeks ago? A Chinese spy balloon was suspected over Montana, over Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. 4 days later, it was shot down in the Atlantic Ocean. The United States went crazy, right? A Chinese balloon with a satellite hanging from underneath it, actively spying on us in our own airspace. Like, the American public went nuts. And then the next 3 things that got shot down, what did they call them?
UAPs.
Unidentified flying objects, UFOs, or unidentified aerial phenomenon, right? They did not want to call them balloons because the government realized that by calling so much attention to the fact that this first balloon was a Chinese balloon and a spy satellite, they had painted themselves into a corner. Now they had an international incident they had to manage because they gave too much information to the American public. Simply by having the same thing happen again, and it wasn't even the same thing. It wasn't a Chinese spy balloon at all. It was a frickin' Idaho University research balloon that they shot down over the Great Lakes, right? They didn't want to run the risk of calling it a balloon, even though it was reported as a spherical object or whatever they call it, right? They would prefer to call it a UFO because China spy balloon, everybody pays attention. UFO shot down, nobody really pays attention. So inside the United States, what ends up happening is governments, government, military, federal government, you name it, administration, they pick words that are less alarmist, and that's the words that they choose to use when they brief the media at the White House. Hey, we found an unidentified flying object over Idaho, or whatever else it might be, right? Somebody writes that story up, all the UFO people in the world get excited. Nobody cares anymore from the China spy balloon stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And the US government, probably rightfully so, is assuming that the average American isn't smart enough to connect the two. Spy balloon here, UFO there. But what if that UFO is actually a balloon? So then we have 2 more incidents over the next week and a half, 2 more balloons shot down by F-35s and F-16s. Again, balloons, but they don't call them balloons, they call them UFOs. And then what happens? Now the federal government has just said that they shot down 3 UFOs. Now all of a sudden it's freaking headline news again. And they're like, oh shit, we shouldn't have called them UFOs. Or at least we shouldn't have called all 3 of them UFOs, because now the whole world thinks that we are shooting down UFOs. We've got to back this up, right? So the government does a very bad job of controlling the information flow because they know they can't. It's difficult for them to do so. But they can control classified information. So they will overclassify. You've seen that, I'm sure, in your days at CIA and in the SEAL teams. We overclassify all the time as a stopgap to making sure that we don't accidentally overshare. So that's how we handle misinformation. We make the information unavailable, knowing full well that journalists and bloggers and whoever else are going to jump onto the story without all the facts and make mistakes. If it benefits American security, national security, they have no problem with that. Sometimes they even seed intentional information just so that they can send a message, like you saw in the beginning part of Ukraine, like you saw with all the soldier counts in Ukraine. I remember in the first 3 or 4 months, the US government was confirming reports from Ukrainian generals about 50,000 dead Russian soldiers compared to 1,500 dead Ukrainian soldiers. Remember when they used to do the body counts? That was just them acknowledging information that they knew was wrong and letting the newspapers run with it anyways. That's how the federal government handles misinformation to the American public. If it benefits national security, let them eat cake. If it benefits national security, let them eat cake.
What do you think that spy balloon was?
What do I think it was?
Yeah.
So my suspicion is that the whole spy balloon concept is decades old. Everybody uses them because it makes sense. A satellite, when you try to spy from a satellite, you have a very narrow window of time when the satellite is on target, right? Because the satellite's going around the Earth and the Earth is here. So when the satellite is over where you need it to be, that's your only window to capture. And then you don't get another capture window until they come back around again. So if there's cloud cover, if it's nighttime, if there's anything wrong, they don't get the image, right? So you're blind for most of the cycles of that satellite. A balloon has a long loiter time, and it moves with predominant winds. So you can basically predict when a balloon is going to be in a certain part of the planet based on predominant wind patterns, altitude, et cetera, and it will loiter there moving at, 70 knots? Like, that's slow. So it'll just stay there forever, taking pictures and sending information. For sure, we use balloons. I've never seen one. I've never heard of one. It just makes technical sense. High probability, low confidence, right? We would use balloons all over the world because you can fly them at 70,000 feet. Nobody really cares that they're there. They don't know if it's a spy balloon or a research balloon or a weather balloon. They don't have a big radar cross-section. So it makes perfect sense to me that Russia's got balloons out there, Iran's got balloons out there, China's got balloons out there. Germany, France, the UK, Italy, they all have balloons out there. And there would be poor or little to no national or international tracking of these balloons. So they're out there. We've always known that they're out there, but we never really saw it as an issue until, for whatever reason, that first Chinese spy balloon broke into American airspace and kind of woke up the administration to say, hey, maybe we should think about this. Maybe we should do something about this. And if you recall, it was like 5 or 7 days before they decided to shoot it down. And then for the next 3, they shot it down the next day.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we hit it, hopefully, with some type of a energy weapon, an EW wave or whatever before it came into our borders. But, you know, as far as the capabilities of what was on there, I mean, do you think that it was only just imagery?
Oh, no way.
Because I did a little segment on this a while back, and what I realized was these people have no idea what kind of capabilities are out there.
Right.
And they think this thing isn't collecting anything that Google Earth hasn't collected yet. And when I saw that in the comments, I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
It's like,
Think
what are they going to get that they can't get off Google Earth? And it's like, I just don't even.
That's exactly what they want you to think.
Yeah, I don't know how. Let's go over some of the capabilities that could have been on there.
For sure. Okay, so if you think of just the first balloon, if you look at pictures of the first balloon, which is a great place to start, just if you Google, pictures of this Chinese spy balloon, and you'll see pictures of it. It was a box. Some say it was the size of a bus. Some say it was the size of a suitcase. The box itself was most likely the size of a suitcase, maybe 2 suitcases, right? The size of a satellite, essentially. And then it had these 2 large solar arrays off to the side, collecting energy from the sun to power all the functions on the box. And then it had at least 2, possibly 4 dishes that were directional dishes that were mounted to the main box. Just by looking at that, there's a couple things that you know for a fact, right? First, you know that it had to be powered externally. So it wasn't a battery that it was carrying. If it was a battery, it would be designed to run until the battery died. It needed solar power for continuous operations. So that takes money, that takes engineering, that takes time, that takes effort. That's not a weather balloon. University of Michigan is not putting up a weather balloon that looks like that. Do you know what I mean? Second, it had those directional dishes. Directional dishes are designed to pick up localized transmissions and transmit focused transmissions. That's what the shape of the dish is for, right? So if you have dish TV, it's there so that you can send and receive a very narrow band message. So 4 dishes gives it the opportunity to collect 4 different targets at one time, or potentially collect 3 different targets at one time and transmit on a 4th. But there's a 2-way transmission and reception mode there. So, and this is just what we see on the outside. If there were, and they were very likely to be signals intelligence collection applications inside, right? Small antenna, round bulbous antenna on the underside or on the backside of the satellite dish or on the backside of the spy balloon. Those would be used for wide spectrum signals collection. So they could be collecting signals that were being encrypted and transmitted from one military base to another, from one CIA base to another. They could be signals connected to pretty much anything you mean. Like they could be signals collecting on a certain frequency in the Wi-Fi network that they know is being used by the president, or that they know is being used by senators or business people or who knows what. So essentially that satellite, that balloon, was a giant sponge collecting signals, radio waves, cellular waves, imagery, thermal imagery, infrared imagery, day and nighttime, right? And then also having the real-time ability to transmit that information back to another location, potentially even to another balloon. Also, the balloons could have been transmitting signals to each other, acting as a series of relays back to a main home base. So a balloon over the United States, a balloon over Canada, a balloon over Mexico, all carrying and transmitting signals between each other, hopscotching back to mainland China. That's how satellites work. That's how anybody with a walkie-talkie can do the same thing, right? When you look at that balloon, all of those capabilities were very likely encased in that one spy balloon.
Would you tell your gold digger girlfriend that you're about to inherit $1 billion?
Alex!
Have you heard about, do you know anything about quantum entanglement by chance?
I know a little bit. I don't know it on a scientific level, but I know the concept.
Do you know that the Chinese are claiming to be able to communicate with their satellites by using quantum entanglement? You don't believe it?
I have yet to know, I have yet to hear about anybody being able to actually replicate or measure the effectiveness of their own quantum entanglement. I think that they've proven that quantum entanglement can happen. I don't know that anyone's been able to measure or control it.
Okay. For the audience, I'll run through it, and I'm not a physicist.
I'm not
So-
either, man. So we're
Right.
speaking the same language.
So I'll break it down the best I can.